In this initial presentation regarding culture and small business entrepreneurship, we will consider two regions, India and the United States. Before diving in, what beliefs or stereotypes do you have about the cultures of India or the United States? Take a moment to consider those cultural beliefs and the differences between the two cultures. In this presentation, we will go through cultural dimensions, demographics, the role of women and gender relations in business, corporate culture, government, and specifically apparel retailing. Before moving into our discussion on cultural dimensions, there is a short video on Hofstede's cultural dimensions that we would like you to watch. The video link is viewable on the screen here and is also available on our website and in the downloadable PDF version of this presentation. Hofstede's cultural dimensions are generally applicable to each country, but they do not necessarily apply to each individual within a specific culture. Use them as a guiding tool rather than a rule when you are working with people from different countries and different cultural backgrounds. Following watching the video on Hofstede's cultural dimensions and thinking about the differences between the US and India, you've probably realized that these cultures are very different when it comes to power distance, individualism, long-term orientation, and indulgence. However, they are fairly similar when it comes to masculinity and uncertainty avoidance. On this chart, you can see United States in comparison with India on the Hofstede's dimensions. As you can see, the power distance, individualism, long-term orientation, and indulgence show very different ratings, while the center two ratings of masculinity and uncertainty avoidance are fairly similar between the United States and India. Feel free to take a moment to review these elements. India had a high score of power distance at 77, which is compared to the world average of 55 and the US rating of 40, which indicates a hierarchy that is clearly established and executed among society, without doubt or reason. In the United States, oftentimes the graduate students call professors by their first names, whereas in India, graduate students address professors as sir or madam. This shows a difference in power distance. In organizations in India, communication is top-down and directive in its style, while it's less formal oftentimes in the United States. Again, another example of the differences in power distance. In terms of individualism is the degree to which people in a society are integrated into groups. In the Hofstede analysis, the US is ranked highest, scoring a 91, versus India, which scores a 48. This indicates that India is a collectivist society. The actions of individuals are influenced by various concepts, such as their opinion of one's family, the extended family, neighbors, work groups, and others, such as wider social networks. Long-term orientation is a dimension that connects the past with the current and future actions and challenges. In the US, long-term orientation is low at 26 versus India, which has a relatively higher long-term orientation at 51. This indicates that people stress thrift and perseverance. Members typically forgive lack of punctuality, a change of plans based on changing reality, because they're more focused on current than long-term changes and actions. Indulgence is the degree to which people in a society allow gratification of basic and natural human drives related to enjoying life and having fun. The USA has a high score with respect to India. USA's indulgence score is 68, while India's is 26. This indicates that Indians are less indulgent. Indians do not put much emphasis on leisure time and control the gratification of their desires. Uncertainty avoidance defines a society's tolerance for ambiguity. Both the US at 46 and India at 40 score low on this dimension, indicating a fair degree of acceptance for new ideas, willingness to try something new or different, and allowing the freedom of expression. Masculinity is another dimension that is rated similarly across the US and India. This is the preference in society for achievement, heroism, assertiveness, and material rewards for success. The US ranking is 62 and India's is 56, which are similar scores, indicating that these societies are driven by competition. Success is defined by the winner best in the field. Punctuality. In India, things are nonlinear, lengthy, complex, independent, and chaotic, thus leading sometimes to unpunctuality. Generally, an appointment time isn't a single point in Indian psyche, it's a range. However, recently the value of time for Indians is increasing and they're getting more punctual. Dominant cultures and habits are changing slowly. For example, government officers are reaching their offices on time. What challenges do you think could arise because of these cultural patterns? How do you think we could resolve them when working across the USA and India? Individualism. According to the Hofstede analysis, the U.S. is ranked highest on individualism and lowest in long-term orientation versus India, leading to great flexibility and ability to react quickly to opportunities, and relatively loose bonds with others, as well as a sense of self-reliance. Americans do not avoid embarrassment like many other cultures because of their ranking of masculinity, which leads to directness. They will tell you honestly what they think and ask for clarification. They will tell you if they don't like something. They will tell you if they will not do something for you, and if they don't understand something. Americans prefer that others tell them the truth instead of giving them an ambiguous response. Egalitarianism. The U.S. has a low score on power distance at 40 versus India's ranking at 77. This is compared to the world average of 55. This suggests greater upward mobility among individuals. But there is a growing difference between the upper and lower classes. There's also a greater belief in equality among individuals. Cooperative interaction across power levels is also growing. A lower uncertainty avoidance score of 46 in the U.S. compared to the world average of 64, but higher than India's at 40, leads to, as noted, greater levels of tolerance for a variety of ideas and beliefs in these two cultures, a greater level of acceptance of novel or unknown situations, and societies that have fewer rules than average. Also, both countries are founded on doctrines of democracy and majority rule. Therefore, opinions are gathered from many people and levels to make a decision. Americans tend to arrive at decisions based on consensus. Americans question authority. If you don't offer your perspective, you may not be seen as a team player at work. Punctuality. Americans see themselves as having a strong work ethic. They work on average 34.4 hours a week. This is ranked 16th in the world, which is relatively low due to the workers forced to work part-time after the Great Recession. But educated white-collar workers spend a lot more time, averaging 50 hours a work week. This puts stress on the work-life balance. Americans live hectic lives and are sleep-deprived when they work such long hours. The U.S., like India, has taken fewer vacation days than many other nations. Americans take 10 of their 12 average vacation days per year. Indians take 15 of their 20 vacation days per year. If you would like to see the bar graph to compare the level of vacation days available and taken by country, you can see the link available in this PowerPoint slide. These facts suggest the focus and orientation of the U.S. worker. Thus, in the U.S., it is seen as important to be on time or a few minutes early. People name a specific time, for instance, 9:10 a.m., to meet, and they meet then. Deadlines should be met or it will affect impressions of professionalism. Think of the last time you personally experienced a culture shock. Culture shock occurs when somebody becomes painfully aware that a person or persons born and educated in another country thinks, feels, and/or acts differently from what was expected. What happened and which one of the 6 Hofstede dimensions explains best the reason for that shock in your situation? We will now move on to the next section on demographics. The total population of India is over 1,250,000,000 people. It's the second most populous country in the world and is almost 4 times the U.S. population. In the chart here, you can see the projected population of India between 2001 and 2026. This represents the share of the additional 371 million people expected through India's population growth. India has a unique class structure. India's society is traditionally divided into castes or clans, not ethnicities. The majority of the population falls within 2 large linguistic groups, Indo-Aryan and Dravidian. Indo-Aryan forms the predominant ethno-linguistic group in northern India, and Dravidians form the predominant ethno-linguistic group in southern India. India is very diverse in terms of languages, music, cuisine, dressing style, religions, customs, cultures, and caste. They differ from place to place within the country. Since independence in 1947, India has brought landmark agricultural revolution, increased their life expectancy, and had a sizable middle class which has emerged. In fact, it has more than doubled. Literacy rates have also quadrupled. But 400 million people still live in poverty. In 2014, India's official poverty line was US $14 a month in rural areas and a US $21 a month in urban areas. 23.6 million people are middle class in India, with a 13,662 average annual wealth. The disadvantaged groups will need to be brought into the mainstream to reap the benefits of economic growth. GDP growth rate is at more than 7.5% in India, and 600 million people are projected to live in cities by 2031. There are many major religious groups in India, including Hinduism, which accounts for 79.8% of the population, Islam, which accounts for 14.2% of the population, Christianity, which accounts for 2.3% of the population, Sikh, which represents 1.7% of the population, Buddhism, which accounts for 0.7% of the population, Jainism, which accounts for 0.4% of the population, and other, which accounts for 0.9% of the population. In contrast, on this chart, you can see the race and ethnicity of the United States. You can see that within the United States, the largest portion of the population is white non-Hispanic. You'll notice through the color coding that other common ethnicities include Black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, Native American non-Hispanic, and multi-ethnic. The ethnic makeup of the United States of a single race is as follows. It's 64% white, 16% Latino American, 12% African American, 5% Asian, and 1% Native American. The U.S. total population is over 322 million people. The U.S. is called the melting pot. This is because of the assimilation or integration of groups which has benefited the United States. It is a fairly multicultural, racial society, more so in the cities, though, than in rural communities. There are also many neighborhoods and towns with a high density of cultural groups. For a map of the ethnic concentration within states, you can go to the link provided on the screen here. Today in the United States, the largest immigrant groups are from Latin countries such as Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. The U.S. Census Bureau projects the percent of non-Hispanic whites to continue to shrink over the next 30 years. There have been improvements in equality for underrepresented or minority groups in the United States over the past 60 years. More underrepresented members have been part of government and industry leadership positions, but it has not been proportional to the population makeup. Laws and agencies have helped to ensure opportunities and protection for ethnic and cultural underrepresented groups in the United States, but economic disparity and blatant and subtle discrimination continue to exist. The breakdown of the U.S. socioeconomic class is as follows. 15% of the U.S. population lives below the poverty line. The U.S. poverty line is $23,050 a year. This is the amount that cannot cover essential needs. The middle class includes blue-collar hourly workers, lower-level white-collar workers and service jobs, as well as the upper middle class or professional white-collar workers, which are the top one-third of America's income. In contrast, the upper class accounts for the upper 5%, which makes between $150,000 and $250,000, while the upper 1% makes over $250,000 a year. Many Americans live in the middle-class lifestyle but are deep in debt or struggling to pay for their lifestyle. Since 1970, income has polarized the nation. The middle class has hollowed out, moving to the lower or upper classes, as seen in a figure provided in the link here. Because personal consumption accounts for 70% of the U.S. economic growth, this trend has led to stagnation of the U.S. economy. The U.S. was built by settlers looking for religious freedom. Separation of church and state is built into the U.S. Constitution. There is a high level of religious tolerance, therefore, in the United States. Religion is separate from the work environment, but some legal challenges by businesses that want to discriminate based on religious beliefs exist. For example, there have been recent examples of bakeries not making wedding cakes for same-sex couples, which is against their religious belief. Christian denominations are the most prevalent in the United States. This includes Catholic, Protestant, and Baptist. Within these, there are most fundamental and liberal sects. Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists are also common in the U.S., with various sects and concentrations in particular regions of the United States. For instance, the Nation of Islam Muslim sect is popular among African Americans. Proselytizing about religious beliefs is often unwelcome. Let's move on to consider the role of women and gender relations. To begin with, let's consider the role of Indian women. Gender discrimination continues to be an enormous problem in the Indian society. Traditional patriarchal norms have relegated women to secondary status within household and workplaces. In theory, there is equality between the sexes. More and more Indian women are also taking on leadership roles in corporations, government, and organizations. Still, women, working or homemakers, are the one who cook at home for their families. There is a huge influence of Western culture on India these days. The concept of co-ed dormitories does not exist in India, though. For example, when traveling, there would be separate girls' and boys' hostels. Homosexuality is rarely accepted, particularly in large cities, but there are regions and communities where homosexuality is reveled. Sexual activities between people of the same gender is illegal, and same-sex couples cannot legally marry or obtain a civil partnership. Men are traditionally seen as providers, while women are seen as caregivers. Girls are still groomed to become an efficient career woman as well as an efficient housemaker, while men are expected to excel mainly in professional fields. Men are beginning to shed their inhibitions about working in the kitchen, though, while women are working late hours. The changing trends are reflected in men and women taking up unconventional work such as pilots and astronauts, while men are honing their skills as chefs and fashion designers. Now let's take a minute to consider the role of women and gender relations in the United States. The U.S. strives for equality between the sexes, but female full-time workers still make only 79 cents for every dollar a male worker makes. Laws help to ensure opportunities and protection in employment and education, while sexual harassment lawsuits can come from degrading statements or remarks about a woman's appearance. Women are generally not subservient or passive. Their provocation and dress is not an overture to men. Women and men can be friends without it being perceived as inappropriate. Women ask men out on dates, and most universities have co-ed dormitories where males and females live in the same buildings and sometimes even on the same floors. Homosexual couples can marry in all 50 states in the United States. Only 28% of households are supported by a father's income alone. 66% of U.S. households are dual income. The number of stay-at-home dads has doubled to 7% over the past 10 years in America, and 32% of married fathers, at 7 million, were a regular source of care for their children under the age of 15 in 2011. This was up from 26% in 2002. Men and women's roles are converging. This can be seen in the second figure on the link provided here through Pew Research. Now let's take a moment to consider corporate culture. To begin with, let's consider the corporate culture in India. Presenting and exchanging business cards is a necessary part of Indian etiquette when doing business. In a business meeting, it is considered rude and poor etiquette to just jump in without related conversation. Meetings usually start with small talk about non-work related topics. Personal questions about your family, children, trips, and so on are not considered rude or prying. It's just part of the friendly Indian social etiquette. Indian etiquette considers it important to use a person's title wherever it's possible. Titles such as Doctor, Professor, Mr., Mrs., or Ms. should be used. In professional instances, doctor or professor may be used, while Mr., Mrs., and Ms. would be used for those without professional titles. Sir and ma'am can also be used for strangers, and uncle or auntie for familiar people. For a stranger who is not particularly old, it's best to use suffixes to the name as a mark of respect. Americans do business wherever they get the best deal or service. Therefore, business relationships are not contingent on developing personal relationships. Gift giving is discouraged or limited by many U.S. companies. If giving gifts, it is appreciated if the gift represents a cultural tradition or your background. A friendly hand on the shoulder, or arm, or back of a colleague of the same sex is acceptable after a rapport is built. In the U.S., greetings will include handshakes that are firm and about 3 seconds long, even with women. Eye contact should be maintained during the greeting. In formal circumstances, use titles and surnames as a courtesy until told to use first names. In most situations, you can begin calling people by their first name or offered nickname. In terms sir, madame, or ma'am when greeting someone are uncommon, but used if getting someone's attention. Miss is used to get the attention of a younger woman. Generally speaking, it is polite to call a woman Ms., pronounced Ms., unless prompted otherwise. Americans tend to exchange cards casually, immediately putting them away for future need. When saying goodbye, Americans may say, "We'll have to get together," or "Let's do lunch." This is simply a friendly gesture, and they will not likely follow through with the act. Americans are very direct. Yes or no mean exactly that, while maybe means it might happen. It is proper to ask questions if something is not understood. Americans are not ashamed to admit what they do not know. Americans reveal personal information more freely with new acquaintances than do other cultures. Americans are often uncomfortable with silence, and it is avoided in social or business meetings. It's rude to interrupt someone speaking, but interruptions are common. Some people will finish your sentence for you. U.S. law requires written contracts. Verbal contracts are rarely legally binding, and lawyers review contracts before the company signs them. It's very important in written communication to spell names correctly and to have correct titles. In U.S. business meetings, very similar to in Indian business meetings, keeping appointments once they are made is important. You must arrive on time or 5 minutes early, particularly in the Northeast and Midwest. 5 minutes late is acceptable with a brief apology. 10 to 15 minutes requires a phone call to warn of the delay and to apologize. Expect very little small talk before getting down to business. Meetings may appear relaxed, but they are taken quite seriously. An agenda may be distributed. Visual presentations with hard data are common. At the meeting's conclusion, decisions will be summarized and action plans for the next steps will be identified. Emphasis is on getting a contract signed rather than on building a relationship, which would come later. Successful meetings are short and decisions are being made. Meeting deadlines is important. Missing deadlines is viewed as irresponsible. Let's take a moment to consider apparel retailing. This is a demonstration of overall retailing in India. The total retail market consists of 60% food and grocery, 8% apparel, 6% mobile and telecom, 5% food services, 4% jewelry, 3% consumer electronics, 3% pharmacy, and 11% other. 95% of Indian retail is unorganized. This means it's small businesses, mom and pop stores, street vendors, and so on. Only 5% of the retail is organized, which would be through shopping centers, malls, and supercenters. Online sales are growing in India, such as through Amazon and other Indian pure-play retailers such as Flipkart. Major retail players have prominence in organized retail markets. This includes retailers like Shoppers Stop, Pantaloon, Trent, and Reliance. In India, the majority of consumers shop in local small shops. A trend has been observed where consumers, mostly in urban areas, are also buying from organized retail stores and malls. Consumers are usually paying in cash for most of their transactions. Debit cards and credit cards are becoming more popular, though. Traditionally, Indian consumers are thrifty when it comes to spending. In organized retail venues, the prices are not negotiable. This refers to organized venues like malls, shopping centers, and supermarkets. However, in local mom and pop stores, street vendors, or small businesses, you need to negotiate the price. Numerous taxes are also added on to the cost of goods and services. The government is also trying to pass a bill which would be a comprehensive indirect tax on manufacture, sales, and consumption of goods and services throughout India to replace all these other taxes. Organized retailers are slowly adopting new technologies to improve their efficiencies. This includes customer interfacing systems like barcoding, scanners, POS systems, card payment, and electronic payment. They're also looking at operational support systems such as ERP and CRM and e-commerce. Here you can see the total retail establishment by industry in the United States. On this chart, we can see the direct impact of retail industry by subsector in the United States. This is provided by the National Retail Federation and PricewaterhouseCoopers. In the U.S., apparel retail sales are seldom a career goal, leading to much turnover in the retailing industry. There's a lot of part-time help, and some staff are not well informed about the product due to the high turnover. But superior customer service is a competitive advantage for a number of retailers, both large and small, within the United States. The use of commission-based incentives varies by retailer, but can be seen as an advantage for customer service. Small, local, independent retailers are most common in rural small communities. Second-hand or used clothing includes vintage clothing stores and flea markets, which is a collective of vendors on specific days of the week. But the U.S. is actually dominated by organized retail. This includes major brand departments like Saks and specialty stores like Nike. It also has a lot of discount merchandisers like Walmart and membership-based clubs like Costco. There are also a lot of luxury brand retailers such as Gucci present in the United States. These organized retailers are much more common than the small local independent retailers. Outlet malls dedicated to discount and past season products are also common. Large shopping malls, lifestyle centers with diverse range of retail brands, restaurant, and entertainment venues are also common. Superstores that offer the broadest range of brands across product categories can easily be found, and online sales continue to grow, including consumer-to-consumer selling sites. Many consumers shop across these options from discount to luxury brand and across platforms. Showrooming is the act of trying on the product in the brick-and-mortar store but buying it online to get a better price. This is increasing in popularity and prevalence in the United States. If a customer is not satisfied with the product quality, he or she expects the retailer to accept the returned product. A full refund requires that the customer has the receipt and return it within 30 or 90 days, and the product must be unworn. But these are common rules within the United States. To keep the customer, the retailer's motto is, "The customer is always right." Many consumers buy now and pay later in the United States by using credit cards. The U.S. consumer holds 2.6 credit cards on average. Some consumers are deeply in debt because of this. The average American household has $5,700 of debt. The average for balance-carrying households is $16,048. The Great Recession has made consumers more cautious in spending, lowering the debt. The price marked on new apparel products is not negotiable in the United States, but retailers use frequent sales to attract customers and increase the sale of the good. State and local taxes on goods are added at the time of checkout, but they are set, and they are only two elements of tax that are added. Retailers use a variety of new technologies to make the shopping experience more efficient and enjoyable, such as self-checkout and price check scanners, iBeacon Bluetooth technology to send a relevant coupon to customers in the vicinity of a specific product in the store, and magic mirrors to virtually see how the product would look on the body without actually trying it on. That concludes the first presentation on cultural diversity between India and the United States. We hope you've learned a lot about the differences between India and the United States, both in terms of the markets, business practices, and consumer shopping habits. We hope you take a moment to consider your similarities and differences to other shoppers in the marketplace.